I already started this off bad. Welcome everybody to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am really grateful for you all being here today. It's going to be an interesting show. We're going to be talking about the First Amendment and many things surrounding that. Um, so welcome one and all. If you like what you see, please feel free to maybe toss me a like, a little bit of a subscribe, comment down below. Maybe even hit the notification bell if you actually really like what you see. But I totally understand if you don't. But if you don't, still tell me what you don't like. Tell me what you think your opinion is on how things could be better, or whatever the case is. So yeah, absolutely join in on the conversation tonight. And I got a few things here for housekeeping beyond that. In the future, I'm going to be having a couple return guests that you all know. Sean, who is in my first episode, is planning on coming back here, hopefully in a couple episodes. He's very busy, doing his campaign for where he lives. He's running for office, and so I wish him the best of luck on that, sir. Biggest wishes to you. And then Tom Edlam, who I had on the recent episode, will be making a return. I'm in talks with him, and that's also going to be a really good show, but I'm not going to spoil it for you just yet. When it gets a little bit closer, I will let you know everything that's going on. So that's basically some of my housekeeping out of the way. And now we're going to move on to if I get my direction right, who this wonderful person is. He goes by Blackbeard, but if you would like to share your actual name, that's up to you. I have brought him on for this conversation in particular because he's kind of a smart guy. So without further ado, feel free to introduce yourself, sir.
My actual name is Cletus. It's Roman, but people abuse it, and they make fun of hillbillies for it. But it is a proper Roman name. It's a beautiful name. And I just, if there's one stipulation that I could make, it's that I know that my subtitle says free speech abuser, but it should have said habitual and chronic abuser of free speech. So I do apologize for the inaccuracy of that statement. When it comes to legal matters, not giving legal advice, as I am not a lawyer, not licensed to do so, specificity in the definition of words becomes of the utmost importance. And so I do apologize for that oversight. I am Blackbeard, first of his name. This moniker was inspired by none other than Redbeard himself. When I noticed that that was his name, and yet when I observed the nature of my own beard, I realized that there was not much red in it, and it was of a darker shade, and I thought it's only appropriate that I become Blackbeard. I may or may not be a pirate. I can't make any definitive statements in that regard, but if you look behind me, you'll notice a maritime-themed bar, and I hope you appreciate it as much as I do.
Outstanding. Like that is probably one of the most eloquent introductions and well put together introductions I think I've seen you put forth thus far. So thank you very much for that. Oh boy, this is gonna. I was telling Blackbeard today before we started what a loaded conversation the First Amendment really is. I mean, there's 100 different directions that we could honestly go with this conversation, and I'm trying to keep it somewhat not crazy linear, but at least somewhat contained, because there's going to be more conversations in the future, but there's a few particular things that I would like to stay on track with. So I do this crazy thing to where I actually try and draft out an overview, and then I try to send it to my guests, so that way I'm not just trying to evoke a random reaction to a question. So that being said, we're going to be covering quite a bit. What is the First Amendment? How is how is it important to preserving liberty, but also what is the ramifications of the attempts to control speech and the other four rights codified within the First Amendment, and what does that mean for controlling society for people who really seem to want to grab a lot more power? They want to grab a lot more influence. They want to try and control a narrative, or whatever the case is. and really trying to shape a subsequent outcome of a given situation narratively. And one of the, and as we continue with this conversation, we're going to end up folding into, surrounding protests, surrounding media, and ultimately, and it might sound kind of ridiculous, but how, there is this knack amongst elected officials, these bureaucrats, and not just even in the United States, but all over the world, to where they try and take what your rights are and they try to weaponize them against you. They try to utilize your own rights against you to agree to giving them away or to agree to some concessions, and that's just not anything that we want any part of. So I think we'll start off here, and I'll kind of give a brief summary of what the First Amendment is. And it is essentially a codifying of 5 essential rights that we have. And the most common one, which is the right to free speech, then you have the right to the freedom of religion, the right to assemble, we have the right to redress of grievances, and then we also and then I also forgot the 5th one, because of course I did, and this is a live recording. Then there's one, it'll come back to me, but there's essentially 5 rights that we have. And it's amazing how, it seems like it's a knee-jerk reaction all the time when we talk about the First Amendment. We always fixate on free speech, or we always fixate on the freedom of religion. Not to say that they're not important, but there's more to it. And so with that being said, if we don't preserve these things, because they are essentially our first line of defense, it makes it very hard to be outspoken and to stand up for our liberty, because it is essentially the bulwark of, fighting back or pushing back against government authoritarian overreach, tyranny, whatever it is you'd like to call it, without having to get to the Second Amendment, which is what it is all about. And we will have an episode on the Second Amendment eventually, but I would like to remain in the first. So I guess, Blackbeard, when we look at the First Amendment, why do you think that it is that people just fixate on 2? Why do you think that it's necessarily that they don't really acknowledge the other 3, but it seems like the 2 tend to be mainstream? Or I guess perhaps better put, why is it that it seems like it's almost always about free speech, but it doesn't actually entail anything else? I mean, we've talked about this before, but it just seems like people kind of get sucked into this this dichotomy or this argument, and then it's like they lose sight of everything else that's there. And I think that is in part kind of the goal. So what is your perception with how that all works?
So I think that the reason that people focus on freedom of speech and that the state shall not establish basically a church state, it's freedom
Mm,
of religion. I think the reason that, and people don't look at it that way in point of fact anymore, but
right.
that was the original intention, right? So,
Hmm.
but the reason you can focus on those is because those are the lowest hanging fruit. They
Sure.
require the least amount of effort. So, and what do I mean by that? I mean, most religions will have you like go physically to a place of worship, but it isn't strictly necessary. Um, so you can practice that in your own home, and it's very low effort, and that's in that sense. And that's also true of speech. I mean, I'm using it right now, and all I had to do was stick earbuds in and sit in my chair. But
Sure.
but like assembling, right? Well, that requires coordination and effort, a certain measure of community
Hmm.
interaction with other people to a greater extent. I'm not saying religion doesn't, because there's some of that too. I'm just
Yep.
saying that it's a little bit more involved to do something like that. And then as it pertains to the press, I mean, that's kind
That
of
there's the 5th one, and I don't know why I forgot it, but I hate to interrupt. I
no,
apologize,
yeah.
but but that is also another one that just is hampered on a lot. And I think it really kind of allies to what you're about to say or what you are saying already. So
Yeah, I mean, most of us aren't journalists. You know, we might act as like kind of amateur journalists in a certain sense, and it's not that you have to be to appreciate that. It's just
yeah,
that the pool of people that have direct, interface with something like that is a lot smaller. And frankly, in today's environment, the idea of freedom of the press is kind of like, eh, they're so infiltrated by
yeah,
so many factions that it's like, look, these rights are there, but there's ways of getting around all of these rights without overtly and directly violating them. And that's not something that's like a novel idea
yeah,
for that they just figured out last year. I mean, this has been going on for quite some time. So I think
sure,
it has to do with the level of effort and the accessibility, the pool of people that are even interfacing with those rights in that sense.
yeah.
um yeah.
Well, and when I will kind of come off of the press point real quick. I remember um, there there was an episode that Chris Ann Hall had done a while, like a couple of years ago, and it was because there was I wish I could remember the official's name, but the gal was like um, it might have been the press secretary several years ago, and she was like, oh, like not everybody, like you where are your creds, like where are your credentials for being in the press? And Chris Ann Hall essentially was just like, what do you mean? Like I can walk out with a phone, record an event, give my opinion, and by all rights, that to some degree does put it can make you a part of the press. Like if you're reporting on something, you don't need something to necessarily say that, here I am, here's my credentials. Although, to be fair, it may help, especially if you know people that help you get into a more formal format, or people that can help you get to a higher level to where you can speak to more people, you get more outreach. But in the end of the day, like we all have the ability to exercise these rights. We can be the press. We have the right to free speech. The everyman can redress their grievances. We have the right, to go to the church that we want. And in the end of the day, what most people don't understand about separation of church and state is it's not so much keeping the church out of the state as it is keeping the state out of the church. And so there's you know and that also especially goes into assembly. But there's so many misconceptions about this conversation, and we actually had a conversation just before this about, at what point, does where is kind of that line with property rights and then free speech? So if I was to come to your house and I start yelling obscenities and stuff like that, you have every right to tell me to leave, right? Because it's your property, so you can exercise your property rights. And there is a fine line where when your rights start to impose or impede upon somebody else, and there are there are certain parameters for that. Of course, they have to be very egregious, but when they start to impede or impose themselves on somebody else, then that person also has the right to exercise their rights, in particular property rights, to tell you, hey, look, like you either need to kind of chill out a little bit, or I'm going to have you leave. And when we look at the media aspect of this, or the press aspect of it, when we go on to a private company, and we go to talk about certain things, they do, in fact, and I know people don't like this, but they do have the ability to say, hey, we don't want you talking about that here. And so I think there's a lot of also misunderstanding. There's a lot of educational conflicts that exist, especially as it pertains not just to the First Amendment, but also the rest of our amendments. And so, you know, I guess in that realm, and this is kind of a nice precursor to everything else that we're going to talk about. But do you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, and share your thoughts?
Well, So it has to do with power dynamics.
Sure.
At the time that the Constitution was drafted, I think it's fair to say that the dominant position of power was in the hands of non-private entities, that is to say, the government, right? But in the time that we live in, because of technological development, um, it becomes more of a question about who really has a greater grasp on power. So, for example, in
Sure.
a nation that allegedly exists according to democratic principles, soft power becomes more important than hard power. And the
Mm,
soft power is now exercised through private enterprise that maintain monopolistic powers. Now, that is the
sure.
government's fault for not using antitrust legislations to break these up, but it's not in their interest to do so at this time, especially if they're able to exercise soft power through workarounds in order
Sure.
to, frankly, exert more power than they could have if they were to do it overtly. So, like, I think there is a case to be made for nationalization, but you'll get all of the trappings of government when it comes nationalized, in the sense of like inefficiencies and red tape, and everything
Mm,
will be sluggish and old,
sure.
and that's just the way that it goes with that. So, again, it's like, who has the power? It's like the power to change men's minds exists in these platforms. It doesn't exist in like the New York Times, which I understand is
Sure.
private, but it's been, you have what is it, Operation Mockingbird and so forth. It's been
Yeah.
influential since the 60s. So, um, yeah, I think it's just a matter of power dynamics in relation to technological development. They just shifted some of the soft power that makes the operation of the control and the guidance of the direction of civilization at this time different in terms
Mhm.
of its dynamics than at the inception of, say, the Constitution, when those um, rights were enumerated. And so it's really that in my mind.
Sure. Yeah, and I kind of like where you went there because there is an ongoing discussion. I'm not going to get too deep into it because I think there's enough people um, far better than I that can explain it far more eloquently than me. But um, there's a discussion right now about people's ability to exercise their free speech, the ability to talk about certain things, to be able to take positions on certain things, and whether or not they are or are not a citizen here. And a lot of people say, oh well, like this is our constitution, and it's like, yeah, but what people fail to understand also is the Constitution merely codifies the rights. So they're recognizing the rights that Americans absolutely have, but these are rights also that pre-exist the United States. They pre-exist the world. They're naturally occurring. We get these with these rights at birth, and as we grow older, we have the ability to exercise these rights as we mature and we become more cognizant of them. And so in the end of the day, when I see people that get up in arms about people from abroad that want to exercise their rights, whether it's here, whether it's there, whatever the case is, it's like, okay, so what you have to understand though is our Constitution is we codified these rights. We recognize these rights. That is what sets us apart from other countries because it is foundational to who we are as Americans, but it is not exclusive to being an American. And I think that's it's a much broader conversation. And again, I think that there's individuals like Dave Smith. You and I were talking about Dave Smith, Scott Horton, and many other people that I think do a fantastic job covering a myriad of the different issues around that as it pertains to foreigners and whatnot. But what, kind of what's your takeaway as it is in regard to that, though, too?
I have two perspectives on it.
Sure.
One of them is very virtuous, and one of them is
Mm,
very pragmatic.
okay.
So, if you're looking at it
Mm,
like from a philosophical perspective,
mm,
if it'll get into the topic of rights versus privileges.
yeah.
Somebody was talking to me about that once, and they're like, here's an example of a right that is not enumerated,
Mm-hmm.
in the Bill of Rights. But to be fair, it says that those rights are not explicitly stated are reserved to the
And
states to deal with.
yep.
Yeah.
And then there's the Ninth Amendment as well, which also explains just because it's simply not here does not mean that it's not that it wouldn't be a right. But please
Sure.
continue. Yep.
So like one of these rights is the right to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's
Yep.
like, well, so the difference is like a privilege is something that someone in a position of greater power than you, who has power over you, affords you a latitude for.
Yes. Yep.
So, but a right is something which is like self-evident. So how do we know that the right, it's a right to travel and not a privilege to travel? And the answer is that if when you exited the womb, you may have noticed that if you look down, you have these like almost stalks coming out of your mid region that go down to these.
Yeah.
Okay, and as you're able to will them to propel you forward in time and space,
Yeah.
to travel, in other words. And so we know that it is a right to travel because you can,
Mm-hmm.
like because you're designed to
Yeah.
by and if you're designed to, and that's another thing, I mean, that has to do with rights, because truly, if there isn't a creator, I don't know how you ontologically ground anything. Everything at that point kind of collapses into a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a deeper thing that's neither here nor there. So given all that, right? So let's say
Sure.
that these are rights. Let's say that they are natural rights. They're not civil rights. They're natural rights. Civil rights are really privileges. It's just another name for a privilege bestowed by the civil authorities. Again, not a lawyer, just my lay understanding. So so let's say that these are rights in point of fact. And it's like, well, do they apply to everyone then? And the answer is they do apply to everyone. They do apply to everyone. So should we, the moral position is then to apply them to everyone, whether or not they're under the jurisdiction of the Constitution. Now, pragmatically,
Mm.
I think that if you want to make the argument that, hey, they're not under the jurisdiction, so they don't have these rights, if that's what you have to do to make sure that you survive, then I
Yeah.
think you should do it.
Mm.
But if you want to talk about morally, like in point of fact, do they have the rights? Are you violating them by not allowing them to exercise them? Sure. But
Mm-hmm.
if the consequence of not doing it is the end of your civilization, then do it. Because you can be, as you're, cry till the wolves come home about your rights as they just trample on them, and then you cease to exist and nobody lives under the rights anymore because nobody
Mm.
even remembers them or has the awareness enough to be able to elucidate them and say, hey, wait a minute, I just realized I have a right to travel.
Sure.
It's like, so I don't know, that's probably not a very satisfying answer, but that's how I look at it.
But I think you also look at to some degree you look at both sides of or ways of thinking, right? Because you did. I think we can't forget what the pragmatic side of that is, and I think it's a side that often many people would lend to take. To be quite honest with you, it because it presents a somewhat an immediate solution. It's an agreeable solution to many people, um, and while I may or may not agree with that, or whatever the case is, it is still a point of view that people have when it comes to rights, not just the First Amendment. Um, and so I think that's another thing that people tend to kind of ignore is we're so we do tend to get so wrapped up into whatever it is that we're doing, especially if we have opposition that we're trying to rally against, that it's like, okay, like I 100% agree. Like I'm a very liberty oriented guy. I believe in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and in the rights that are codified and that are amplified, I would even say, in the Constitution, and furthermore, the definitive parameters of how government is supposed to conduct themselves. But it's one of those things to where it's like, but in my ability to be able to defend the things that I care about, I have to actually take some time to understand the opposing point of view because if you don't know where they're coming from, especially as it pertains to free speech and what their goals are and what they're trying to do, and freedom of religion. I mean, there are you you look at the First Amendment in general and look at how much it was degraded in 2000, I would say late 2019, all the way up till probably about late 2022. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. And we all know what occurred in that, as it pertains to the Rona and that particular situation. But it's like, look at how much that they tried to control that. And then a lot of people, rightfully so, were very upset about that because they were telling you couldn't go to church, didn't have the right or the freedom to assemble, you don't have the right to go forth and speak freely about what is going on. You had people that were trying to bring awareness about things that were taking place. And so you're not only is that a speech issue, but it's potentially a freedom of the press issue. And not only that, but look at how they absolutely ramped down on, bringing forth grievances. You couldn't even bring forth a grievance, right? And so it is important to understand their motivations, because if you don't understand their motivations, and I know that there's people that are just like, oh well, it's tyranny, it's like, well, clearly it's some form of tyranny, but understanding how it's coming about is equally important, so that way when you go to oppose it, you're not just saying it's tyranny. you know you're dealing with people that are attempting to, or are in some ways intelligent, and you have to be able to meet them on that ground, equal to or better than what they are. And so there is a sense of intelligence that comes into being able to advocate and defend your rights, and your liberties. And the First Amendment is no exception whatsoever as it concerns this. Now, when and I think as a primer, I think we hit on a lot of really good points, and I think we're kind of seeing where the direction of this is starting to go and where it's starting to flow. So the big question that I have, and for all of you that are wondering somewhat why I'm looking off to the side, because I have found that taking notes actually helps. So to control speech and the other four rights is to control society and the subsequent outcomes of a given situation narratively.
Yeah.
I just kind of went over that, but Blackbeard, if you could kind of expound upon that, because I know that we've had conversations about this before, especially as it comes to the consolidation of control and ultimately what that brings us to. Would you please do so?
Repeat that last part again, that last little segment, because I did have it.
In terms of the
That
narrative,
last
or
narrative. There it is. Okay.
yep,
So
yep,
yeah, I was actually discussing this with AI earlier because I have no friends. I'm kidding, sort of. Um, but I was talking about, like, so this is the thing, because governments, is at least most governments,
yeah,
like the vast majority of governments actually, are a kind of corporation, and literally a kind of corporation. And I was asking the AI, I was like, if I wanted to go out to lunch with my friend John down the road, could I do that? And it was like, well, yeah, you could go to lunch with John. I said, awesome. Could I go to lunch with the government? And it was like, well, you can't go to lunch with the government, although they're afforded certain rights that are given to persons. Well, in law, it is a person.
mm,
Okay, corporations are a person in law.
yeah,
And so what it boils down to is that government ultimately is fictitious. It is a story. It is the narrative that we tell ourselves. But it's a game that we play, that we make real, like an egregore, through
mm,
faith, through concentrated will and
mm,
belief. It becomes real, in a sense. And
sure,
so y- your point about, like, the narrative control then is the control of the flow of society, because it is
hmm,
what establishes the boundary of the fictional story that we tell ourselves and then make
sure,
real by action through our belief in it. So controlling the narrative is everything, and that is obviously, so I want to be clear, like I fully appreciate that, like, so take what had just happened, for example, where they trample on our rights, and it's like, well, we justify it because it could be civilizational ending. And a
Yeah.
lot of people saw that and they're like, well, no, we know this is a scam, okay, so
Yeah.
and it's not. And then but then they're like, no, they're true believers, so it's very real, and so it's like we
Yeah.
have to do it because the heck with your rights, on principle. What's it mean if we're all dead? And
Correct.
I know that this is not, I know this isn't like a lovely thing to say, and it is heretical in a certain kind of way. But what it tells me is that, because here's what happens when you live by your principles, that's great, and it's great about be for the person that you become. But the
Mm,
reason that conservatism has lost for as long as it has, not the only reason, but a major reason, is because they're more concerned with principles than outcome. And in
sure.
that, they've lost ground and they lost power, while the other one is like just changes its narrative, it changes its story all the time. It can do it in
Yeah.
24 hours to whatever it needs to maintain power. And you're like, well, I don't want to be that. Okay, but I'm just telling you, the way to win is to make sure that the levers of power are in your hands. So it's like, but
Mm,
if they get the power, you might, like, they'll criticize this over any overreach that they see right now. Is like, just remember that whatever they open the window to with this, when this group of this
sure.
side is in power, that's going to be afforded to the other side when they're in power. And it's like, well, then you better make sure they don't get power. But
Sure.
there's no such thing as, like, it's not, they're not going to do it. Like,
Yeah.
the other side gets on, they'll open it up. And nobody's ever like, nobody ever makes this statement, well, I hate that the other side is doing these abuses, but thank God they're doing it, because once we're in power, the door will be open, and I hope that they know. It's like, it's a power game. Listen, I hate to be,
Yeah.
it's just the pragmatic level of it is what we have to live out. And principles are important because they're the framework and the buttress for the
Mm,
story. Okay, they are everything. And I have, listen, I'm bent that way. Like, I want to live by principle, consequences be darned. Try not to swear
yeah.
because I want the algorithm to love us. But
Yeah.
there's a tension that I see. There's a tension where you get really tired of losing. You get
Sure.
really,
Yeah.
really tired of losing because the consequences are that principled people suffer more. And it's a very sticky moral question
Mm,
where how far do I push the bounds? And the truth of it is that the story that is written, okay, whether that's in law or kind of like the through osmosis, through cultural custom, the story as it's written is less important than the people who have the authority to define the words that comprise the story.
mm,
It's the people that have the power to define the words that have the power to define what an overreach is and what it isn't. Okay.
right. Yeah. No, and it's great that you bring that up because, I think that also falls very much to our subsequent generational fault, to where we have deprived ourselves from fundamental education as it pertains to our rights, because it's like, if you don't even know what you're trying to defend, if you don't even understand what you're trying to maintain, it becomes very, very difficult when they start trying to redefine a particular word, redefine the meaning, redefine the parameters of what our constitution is. And and so I think also I do get the sense that there's a growing amount of pragmatism for our shrinking amount of education as it pertains to our rights, because principally it does become more feasible when you have a population that's properly educated. And our several of our founders did talk about this. The things that they held in very high esteem are virtue, morality, and education is the bedrock of a properly liberty oriented society. But in this current juncture, we are, I would say, to many degrees, we've become very morally bankrupt. We've become virtuously bankrupt, and we've become almost educationally bankrupt in a way that's somewhat embarrassing. And I've had a discussion before, to where it's like I would challenge somebody today from a Harvard University to take their their educational prowess in go to a 14-year-old post 1790s, and be able to tell them what it is that they think that their rights are, what it is that they think certain legal terms are. And I'm here to tell you, like, it wasn't perfect back then either. It was far from perfect, but the educational and intellectual capacity at that point, like, it, even the poorest still had a higher degree of intellectual capacity. And so I do, and perhaps this is somewhat tinfoil hatish, but I do believe that it is very much in part and parcel of design. I do think that a population that is morally and virtuously bankrupt, as well as educationally bankrupt, are far easier to control. They don't know when you're trying to change the definitions, the terminology, the words. And then once you're able to do that, then you can come in and circumvent their rights. And furthermore, you have the ability to control speech. And I know that it's harped on a lot, but anybody who's ever read 1984, they literally, Orwell literally depicts this, this horrible regime that people live under, to where they go through and they redefine words. They have, this whole apparatus to where they either eliminate words, they redefine words, they tell you what the word means now versus what it means then. And and this is one of the biggest arguments, is like, are we going to exercise our rights in order to keep them, or are we, through our lack of exercising our rights, going to give them up? And in exercising your rights, there has to be a certain degree of understanding of what those rights are. And so I think, like, you did a very great job. And again, it's why I appreciate you bringing up the pragmatic perspective, because I do believe to some degree that our pragmatism today is a result of our lack of education of not just our rights, but other core fundamental things that made us who we were. And not just the United States. I mean, look at Europe, look at so many other places. I mean, you're looking at the deprivation and the destruction of just rights and culture and stuff like that. People are forgetting it. They're taught to forget these things, and as a result, I do think that's where you get overwhelming amounts of pragmatism. Not to say necessarily that, again, I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, but like you kind of said, it's kind of the times that we're in, right? And you have to have some ability to adapt in order to get ahead. And I'll kind of leave it on this, and I'll put it back over to you. But another thing that was very well understood, at least by our founders and many people of the time, is if you want to advance liberty, do not expect to do it overnight, and don't expect to do it over miles. It is not perhaps in their terminology of distance, but you're not taking great leaps and bounds immediately. It has to be done incrementally over time. And if you look at the way that they've eroded so many of the traditions, the cultures, the institutions, in so much as the foundational bedrock of our country, but also in our founding documents, it didn't happen overnight. It didn't occur over the course of a week. It was done generationally, where people were not only taught to forget, but they were directed to forget. And when I say directed, they literally, it's like, oh, well, this isn't what this means anymore. This is what it actually means. And it was slow, incremental changing of things over time. Because if you change something in an immediate sense, especially in a very large sense, people are going to notice. I mean,
Yeah.
And I know I'm getting off on a little bit on a tangent, but I'll go here because I think it's relevant. Most people don't realize that the first attempt at the Federal Reserve failed because people understood what it was. So when they passed the Federal Reserve, when they got the Federal Reserve organized and they were able to get it, on the ground running, so to speak, they had to do it while most of Congress was out, and they had to do it when the people who weren't there to vote it down the first time could do so again. it, I mean, it all, like, it's a pattern, it's all a pattern, and they've done it for well over 100 years now.
Well, the interesting thing about the Federal Reserve in particular is that whether or not it was understood, they felt the need to pass it while Congress was recessed over, I think it was Christmas or something like that. Christmas
Mm,
Eve, it was Christmas
it
Eve.
was.
So it's
Yep.
like, yeah,
Yep.
even that
That's
was
my
underhanded.
understanding.
And you had Charles Lindbergh was very aware of what was going on with that. And they, you know, yeah. So anyway, it's true. Like there's a book by Charlotte Iserby called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America.
Mm,
And and that has to do in particular with the educational system, but they've also used pharmacological means. And it's, I think it, it's understood. Look, I have to be careful what I say here. Let's look at the animal kingdom. The reason that we are dominant over the animals isn't because we're stronger, it's because of the
mm,
intellectual advantage that we have.
mm.
Okay. And so if you look at it from that perspective of power dynamics, for our rulers to have control over us, it's in their interest to have us dumb rather than
Yes.
intelligent. And I mean that both in a like in a literal crystallized intelligence kind of sense, where it's like the raw computing capacity needs to be lower, but also in terms of education. So like you can have a brilliant mind, but if you just never learn anything, it's not as
Sure.
dangerous. Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, it's like how can we value liberty if we can't conceptualize it?
Right.
So part of the control, I mean, listen, the secret of all control is the riddle of steel from Conan.
Mm.
Flesh or steel isn't strong, boy. Flesh is stronger.
Yes.
Come here to me, my pretty. That's the riddle of steel, is mind control.
Yeah.
That's the secret of the mysteries. It's how do you control everybody else?
Mm.
So how do you control everybody else? Well, the dumber they are, the easier it is. And the
Sure.
more venal and immoral they are, the easier it is because you can control them through addiction and vice.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's like, for example, you look at all these politicians and all the honeypots and all the, you know, um, a mutual friend of ours is kind of upset that certain files haven't been disclosed yet. And it's like,
Yes.
well, what was that all about? And the answer is it was control, blackmail, right?
Mm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's more difficult to blackmail someone who's virtuous and isn't engaged in illicit behavior, because then
Yeah.
you have to invent it. See, then you have to frame people, and that's a little bit more effort. It's a lot easier to just get corruption in there. And so the control is proportional to the level of corruption. And if you can debase
Yeah.
like the casual level of virtue across the society, and you
Mm.
get the people dumb, and you
Yes.
get them uneducated, it's like, man, we got it made, baby.
Yeah.
That's how they look at it. For people that are righteous in their hearts, that want to see humanity flourish. See, that's the problem, is it's the worst in us that has this desire to rule, and the
Mm.
virtuous in us need to rediscover the desire to lead.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
because leaders and manipulative like management kind
Mm-hmm.
of like can occupy the same positions. It's just that it's far more alluring and seductive to the degenerates than it is to people who have cultivated that virtue through discipline and
Sure.
effort.
Yeah.
So we need to rediscover that, but it's like that's one of the sides, that's one of the weaknesses of the good people, insofar as
Mm.
anyone is good, is that they just don't have the desire. Like there's really just so many people, because I feel that impulse too. I'm not saying I'm a good person, but I'm
Sure.
not a psychopath, okay? And like I kind of just want to do my thing. Like,
Yeah.
and most people just kind of want to live their lives, and life is kind of difficult enough. But and part of this, I know I always harp on the money, but we mentioned the Federal Reserve, is that because they've raised the time preference of everybody, even corporations
Mm.
are like, what's next quarter? What's next quarter? Where's the 50-year plan? Where's the 100-year plan? When has anyone ever come out and said, hey, here's the plan for America
Yeah.
200 years from now?
Yeah.
They never do it because they don't look to the future that far. And so in the politicians, the way things are structured, they're looking to their next election, and that, so it's this it's better to have a low time preference, and you're looking out into the future. Is like, where are we going to be? Um,
Right.
and so that's what we need to cultivate too, as virtuous people, to say, I kind of just want to be left alone, but here's why I can't. Here's why I have to
Mm,
invest in the long haul of being involved in this kind of like
yeah.
management of society, because number one, I'm aware enough to be involved. Number two, I think I have the moral virtuous position. And even if I
Mm,
don't, at the end of the day, I want to see my position that I think is right, dominant and effective in culture.
yes.
Um, so I need to look at the long game. But I know I'm being very verbose, but basically what I'm trying to distill it down to is that good people need to look at the long game again, and get these degenerates who are only looking at the short game out of
Yes.
positions of authority and power, so that our progeny, our we pledge our, what is it, our fortune and posterity. What was it, Jeremy?
It's yeah, it's it's
You know what I'm
essentially
talking about,
our
though.
yeah, our lives, our fortunes, and I think
And yeah.
it was either the posterity or liberty. It was a combination of the several, but
So,
yeah,
but the point is that I care about what comes after me.
sure,
I need to care about that. And because we've become so degenerate and so selfish, we're like, I care about me, but I need to
right,
care about the children of the future. Like, for example, like all these children, it's like they look at household formation and it's down so far. Well, why is it down so far? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of reasons, but a major
yeah,
reason is that young people cannot afford to have a home. If you cannot afford to have a home,
right,
then that disincentivizes the formation of families. And
mm,
then the population goes down, and before you know it, you don't exist anymore.
yeah,
So and it's like, well, I earned my, the older generations, I earned my thing. Well, whether you did or whether you didn't, okay, it doesn't really matter. Okay, we're past the
mm,
point of that mattering, quite frankly. But I deserve it. Okay, well, you're the same people that harp on people having an entitled attitude. I'll just say, but let's say that you're entitled. Let's say I grant it. No, let's say I grant
yeah,
it. You're
yeah,
entitled to it, and you deserve
sure,
it. And you earned it. Your children are still dying. You're dying
mm,
out. Your whole civilization is dying out. Even if
yes,
you earned it, maybe pledge your fortune for posterity. Maybe
yeah,
think about the long game. Maybe your quality of life, and it's like, you're gonna, getting, I'm getting wrapped up in my language here. Not trying to by stealing things. I'm just saying that maybe it isn't the end all and be all. Maybe we need to
sure,
exhibit a certain measure of self-sacrifice for what is to come. That is all I'm saying. So, and that's the sacrifice we have to make. And I may eat crow for that in the future. They may
sure.
say Cletus back Blackbeard first in his name. Now that you're doing awfully well, which I'm not, but let's just say that I was. It's like, where are you pledging your thing? It's like, okay, now I have to practice what I preach. But I'm just saying, like, sacrifice is needed for the benefit of
Yeah.
others, and in a way, that's a kind of wealth too that we should think about. Okay, I'm done going on my
Yeah.
rant now,
No,
please.
it was great because I mean, in the end of the day, like it is like that was also, something that was held in very high esteem. Like the fight that we undertake today is not so much as it pertains to us in particular, but it's always to our posterity. It's always to our future. Um, there used to be this disposition, if you will, to where people strived to provide something better for their future than what they had. And I still think that that's a worthwhile ambition. I still think it's a worthwhile goal because yes, you should. And in doing so, I think explaining what it took to get there, the trials, the tribulations, and that's also something that I think some people don't do very good at. So then not to be perhaps negative, but then you end up with brats, right? And they feel entitled to these things, and to some degree, I think when we look at the spectrum of the First Amendment and many of our other rights, I think that we do have an entitlement and we have this disposition. But what's lost on us is there's a fight that's required. It doesn't like these men gave everything up, and let us not forget about the founding mothers like Mercy Otis Warren and so many others, Abigail Adams. But in the end of the day, like all of these people that came before us sacrificed immense amounts of wealth in their own life, many giving their own lives and losing their property and so many other things along the way. That is what sacrifice for liberty looks like. That is what sacrifice for being a truly independent people looks like. That is what sacrifice for something better than what you had looks like. And free speech is it is no lesser in that situation than anything else. And so I think the imperative is people do need to get out and they do need to be more vocal. They do need to get out and be involved in the council meetings. They have to be involved in the groups. They have to be involved in whatever it is. Because look, not everybody is suited for council. Not everybody's suited to organize people. But there's a spot for almost anybody. And look, in the end of the day, if you maybe you don't fit all of those things, you can still use your voice to express your grievances, to say what you think, to go and practice, the faith that you would like to practice and assemble and so on and so forth. But if you're not in a capacity to where you feel you can do that or very well, then support people that can do it better for you.
Yeah.
But don't forget that you still have to exercise your rights. Rights not exercised are rights not kept. And so go ahead, please.
Well, I want to, because that makes me think of this. I want to comment on what Gene said. He said, I'm quoting, "I wish we had the rights you have, losing more each day."
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the thing, Gene. This is what we're trying to say. You have those rights.
Yes.
Because they exist outside of the narrative that is the government, outside that story. They exist naturally. They're self-evident. You have them.
Yes.
What is happening is that power is not allowing you to safely exercise them. So you have them, even if it isn't written down. So it says the Constitution didn't grant to us the rights. It enumerated them. It delineated some of them because they were trying to put a framework, because those rights had been abused in the past. And so I just think it's important, the distinction, to help understand. It's like, under my system, I don't have this, or we can't do this. That's probably all true, but it doesn't change the fact that you have the right. It's just being taken from you. Okay. And then let's see, Centerline says, "Those of us in this timeline will have to suffer in order to help create a better future for the next generations." Period. I don't think the period has to do with menstruation. I think he's just emphasizing his point. But I agree.
Yes.
I agree.
No, and I was just going to say, to Gene, so I have a buddy that lives over in the UK. And me and him have had conversations. I would say that he is definitely more of a libertarian, which is, I don't want to say overwhelmingly rare in Europe, but they do exist, but they're definitely not as prevalent. And I want to provide you with a little bit of history from where you come from, sir, because it's important to what we recognized in our Constitution. So the 1100 Charter of Liberties it involved the right to property and right to representation. The 1215 Magna Carta, no taxation without representation or the right to representation, the right to due process, and the right to redress of grievances. 1628 Petition of Rights, no taxation without representation, so the right to representation, the right to due process, no martial law, no quartering of soldiers, directly influenced the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments that we have today. The 1641 Grand Remonstrance, the acknowledgement by the drafters that there is a pattern and intentional subversion of liberty used by the enemies of liberty, corruption of the courts, infiltration of foreign law, government diminishing property rights, government controlling the church, government creating fiat money, government disarming the people. The English Bill of Rights, which you still have today, is in 1688, encompasses all from before it, and was the present day Bill of Rights our founders enjoyed as British subjects. You have these rights, and your people, as well as my buddies' people who live over in the UK, you have a very, very unique and rich history, which without it, we would not have had in our country in the United States. It is because our founders were educated, it is because they understood their past that they were able to chart a course for the future and to help secure the rights that we have as individuals. But look, I mean, you think about that timeline. That's almost that it's not instantaneous. And when they say when it is said that it's incremental, I mean, you can see where it started. It started at 1100. Started at 1100 and it went all the way to 1688. And it was the 1688 Bill of Rights is the culmination of what you all have over there, as well as what we were able to have after our revolution. So it's so important. And, you know, that's why, again, education is important, you know, for the people that don't understand, for here that don't understand our history, this is why it matters. This is why we have to understand our history, because if you don't know what it is, if you really don't know what it is, then how do you even know what you're fighting for? And there's several people that I've talked to, aside from my friend who lives across the pond, as well as you do, Gene, that they didn't even know any of that. So, you know, it's like, how do you defend what it is that you don't know? The people, and I won't harp on this any further afterwards, but the people of the UK have a more storied history of resisting tyranny than we have in the United States. Let that sink in. And that is by the 5 different charters that I just talked about. So if you think that we're a free people, I'm here to tell you that the people in the UK have the fighting spirit to change that. They have the ability to change it. You are expected and empowered to change it. And we need to find that same resolve as Americans. And the start of that is fundamentally in the First Amendment. And I'm going to kind of show where the pivot point is, but Stephen, or Blackbeard, sorry.
My real name. How dare you?
I know. I think it's a really good point, though, to where like we can have this pivot point of, you know, going into segment 2 about protests and media and the weaponizing of your rights, right? Because in the end of the day, like, that's what it took to get them there. That's what it took to propel them forward to get to the 1688 Bill of Rights. And so when I look at this, we need protests. We need good protests, not just slap together whimsical. We're just going to go protest in front of the Capitol building. No, we need something that has impact, that has weight, and it has fundamental education with the support of people. We need to educate the people that we gather at protests. And that being said, if we want to avoid the media being able to, or at least mitigate the media spin on the protests that we have, it is incumbent upon us to start our own media, to get our own media out there, and to be able to show the truth to people. We cannot sit idly by in the things that we do. So that being said, though, and we've seen this time and time and again in the many decades that I've been around and Blackbeard's been around and so many of the viewers have been around. We've seen the government come in and try and slip a note to the media and say, hey, you know, like, you should definitely say this instead, or it's not really like, we're not saying that you can't have free speech, but what we're really trying to tell you is you just can't say this about these people. And so what we have is a very dangerous cocktail, and it deserves not only being pushed back against, but it deserves a very robust defense. It's not enough to just disagree with it. We have to be out there. So I will relent to you, Blackbeard, because I think this kind of puts you in a good position to make a further point. So please, sir, take it.
Well, I want to talk about the chat a little bit more, if I may.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Gene says we never get taught that. We only hear about slavery. Yeah, that's the same here, Gene. I can't tell you
Yep.
how many books I had to read in school about slavery. It's just
Yeah.
about getting you to hate your own culture. So I mean, you see through it and then it has no power
Mm,
anymore. Just remember it was Western civilization that abolished slavery. We were the first ones to do it, okay? And it still exists in many parts of the world today. So we're not all evil colonizers. In fact, what we spread was called civilization. It's pretty great. So
mm.
um that having been said, my superpowers are retained, sir. That's all I'll say on that. And what is his center line said anything? He said, "Big God are given rights." Yeah, I mean, hey, um, great timeline history pull. You know, I haven't ruled out the possibility that Redbeard is a time traveler. He won't admit it to me, but I have my suspicions.
I've been places and I've seen people. No, I'm just yeah,
You know, so you were talking about the exercise of rights. You know, I one of the things that
yeah,
I thought was thinking about today as I thought about like assembling and that was the do you
yeah,
remember when they were pulling free speech zones? Do you remember
yes,
that?
yep,
I mean, think about the absurdity of that. But that's what I mean is they're like, oh no, 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 you still have free speech, but it's just in this area
yeah,
for safety purposes. They sell if you want to understand the modus operandi
yeah,
of the power structure, it is coercion and fear.
yeah,
Everything is based on fear. It's like they're afraid of stability is a huge thing for them. Like that
yeah,
is they almost worship stability. It's like we just must maintain order and stability,
yeah,
And so if you say this, it could be destabilizing. And if it's true, all the worse, and it has the power of truth to it. At least if you're going to say something destabilizing, make it a half truth or a lie. That would be better. But that's really their perspective, and the horror of it is like, you see in the UK, you see these news stories of like the woman that is praying silently
yeah,
in her head,
yeah,
okay, near an abortion clinic, but people might see it, you
yeah.
know. And
How
that's
dare
what,
you stand there and just like not say anything?
and I think what the government really fundamentally doesn't seem to understand. I'm gonna get a little woo here. I'm gonna get a
Yeah,
little
go
woo,
go ahead,
okay?
go ahead.
Is that these ideas, once they spread, like Mao, what was it? Mao was more terrified of an idea than anything else whose idea, an idea whose time has come. You'll hear people use that phrase
Oh
a
yeah,
lot.
yep.
It's almost like the what is it, hundredth monkey syndrome or something. It just kind of
Mm,
spreads via osmosis, almost
yep,
without words being spoken. All this is about the control of the mind again, because the way that human beings communicate is via symbols, which we call language. In Nordic mythology, the three sisters that controlled the thread of fate were called the Norns,
yep,
but throughout continental Europe, they were called the Word Sisters, WYRD, which is etymologically related to weird. But the idea was the same, is that they spun the fate and the destinies of men
yep,
and gods alike. But so what is it telling you though on a symbolic level? What it's saying is that you control fate by controlling words. And it's not only freedom of speech, because I can speak into the void anything that I want. Um, but it's the idea that the speech is communicated to another mind that's the terrifying thing. And they're
yeah.
so apprehensive now that it's like, but the speech in your head could transmit via osmosis just by your mere presence
Mm.
outside of a yeah, Epstein just ran. We got a random Epstein from CLS. Yes,
I was
you know,
wait, hold on, hold
touche,
on.
sir.
There you go. There you go, CLS. I
Here's
got you,
my yeah,
buddy. You got your one for the day in. There you go.
yeah. So mom and dad versus six police, a van and a car held and released. Yeah, because it's just it's. But I'll tell you this. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Charged with battery, stuck in a cell. Um. So this is something to think about too. That Doesn't mean action doesn't need to be
Mm,
taken. Okay. But this behavior of, oh my God, like what did they say in a chat group? Arrest
yeah,
them. This is not the behavior of someone who is confident. Okay. This is the
right.
behavior of someone who is in abject terror. Okay. Quite frankly. And it's because they're terrified. They understand the numbers game. Look, it's like military tactics, which is way outside of my purview, but you guys will get this. You'll get what I'm saying. It's like you can have the most well-trained military in the world. If you're a force of 50 people and you're going after guys with sticks and stones, but there's 10,000 of them, you're going to lose.
Mm,
You're going to
yeah.
lose. And the number of people that are full knowledge of the administration of this system is a rounding error
Mm,
compared to the rest of us. It's and so they're in abject terror because if these ideas catch on, the numbers game is so not in their favor
yeah.
that it doesn't really matter what they do. Once the
Mm,
knowledge is spread, it is over. It's just over. And
yeah.
in fact, there are so many of us that we wouldn't even have to do anything except not comply with most things, and it would just end. It really does take only
It,
that.
yeah. Yeah. No, oh man. So that's, oh, I can't get off on a tangent for this, but, oh boy, the non-compliance, the not like, it is one of the most powerful forms of nullifying tyranny and overreach that we have at our disposal, just simply refusing to follow along and not comply and not do the thing that they tell us to do, being good little, followers and sheep. Like it, it's I don't say this very strong or very often, because I hate to trivialize it with what I'm about to say. But when you talk about numbers and you talk about non-compliance, quite possibly one of the easiest things to do. What makes it difficult is because, yes, it would in fact bring things to a screeching halt for a while, and we would have to figure out the aftermath. It's the after effects that make it difficult. The act of not complying is not difficult in and of itself. It just requires
It's the
a
sacrifice that's required.
exactly, and so the act itself is not, it is not what is the hardest part. It's acknowledging the sacrifice that comes with it, and I'm so happy that you brought that up because it's one of the most powerful mechanisms that we have. We are not bound to follow constitution or unconstitutional laws. We are not bound to follow, uh, and lay ourselves, our head and our arms into the shackles of our own subjugation. No person. It doesn't matter. Like to do that is it is without logic, and it is without, honestly, what it is it's suicidal because it's without a sense of self-preservation. You are eschewing self-preservation for listening to somebody else. It really is following somebody off the cliff because they tell you to. The only difference is they tell you to, they send a dummy over the cliff, you think it's them, and you find out too late that it's not them. um, it becomes a situation which is so destructive. It is so, uh, I can't even go any farther than that. It's just so destructive and so illogical, and it really requires a lack of self-preservation. I'll keep it at that. But it's so you did. I love the fact that you brought up non-compliance because that really is one thing that is just it's not uttered enough. And anytime, and I will say, like, anytime that you look at protests, anytime that you look at assembly, free speech, it's and as well as the other rights, like that is the one thing that we should have done so much more in around the time of Rona, And that was a litmus test. And I'm here to tell you, like, we can't screw that up again. We absolutely cannot. So yeah. Anyways, I get really in the feels about non-compliance, because it's the one mechanism that nobody wants to use for whatever reason, but they're so willing to start a civil war over something, or they're so willing to advocate for the most extreme thing, or just doing nothing. It blows my mind.
So the way that non-compliance works is the reason that they're so afraid of the words that people say is because this whole thing is a game. It's fictitious. It isn't real. You can't take the government to Denny's and have breakfast with it. Okay, so the only way that it stays real is through your faith, because you believe
Mm,
it, because everybody believes it. And then people start to question it, and then men with guns come to make sure that
hmm.
you continue believing. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you spread the idea, all this shuts down the minute you stop believing,
Yeah.
the minute you lose faith. That's why they can't have you lose faith. Okay. That's the language thing. But it ends the minute you stop believing.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's a
You know what?
spell. It's a
It it
spell.
it really is. And it it can't be expressed enough, in my opinion. Just, you can find the value in something when you see somebody who really wants that thing, and then they work tirelessly to take it from you.
Mm,
And to me, that's the government. If look, if they weren't worried about the things that they were doing, if they weren't worried about some of the things that may be exposed, if they weren't worried about their job being on the line, then why is it that they have such an incentive to block certain forms of speech? Why is it that they rally so hard against certain press agencies and not other press agencies? Why is it that they show favoritism to one side of speech versus the other side of speech? And in a way, it is weaponizing the First Amendment, because what you end up doing is by supporting one side of it and you're denying the other side of it, it now becomes your device. It now becomes the device of all of your thoughts, all of your wants, all of your ideals, and you take that and you project this and you create that narrative, as we've talked about before, and it becomes very insidious. And in the end of the day, I mean, it really, like, I guess a really good example of this is the purposeful propaganda wing of governments, in where they clearly are crafting a narrative, or they're clearly crafting their talking points. And you know, when I look at, and this might, upset some people, but I always find it interesting that I shouldn't say we, but like our government shows favoritism to certain forms of speech, like they show favoritism to certain terrorist groups around the world. It's not terrorism if they're supporting that particular group, but if they see a better deal and they're like, nope, we're not supporting you, you're the terrorist now, and these are freedom fighters. They do the same thing with speech, because it's useful to them. It's nothing but a whimsical little
mm,
tool that they can
mm,
use to exploit and subvert. And let's be completely honest. I mean, in the end of the day, they say the exact same thing about speech. Oh, these people are patriots and these people are freedom fighters, and their
mm,
opinions
mm,
matter so much more. And these people who talk about 10th Amendment issues, or abortion issues, or rally for the Second Amendment, or whatever it is that has to do with something as it pertains to liberty. These people are terrorists, and it's dangerous speech, and these people are a danger to society. And that, it goes back to
mm,
this notion of, being able to craft and label and to redefine words and what they
mm,
mean. So when you have a government that feels so compelled, and like they have so much leeway to be able to do that, well, it's no mistake that you end up having a government that sends men who are masked to go drag somebody off of a street because they
Mm,
said something in support of one group with absolutely no charges, no accusations, no nothing other than the fact that they said uh, something online that affected nobody. They simply shared their opinion, and nobody knows where these people go. And if you think I'm talking about Ukraine, it's not Ukraine. It's in the back. It's in our backyard. It's our government that does these things, and they've been doing it for a very long time. These are the type of people that we have to deal with on a daily basis, and you don't always know where they are. You don't know that what you're going to post online one day is going to get you a visit from the federales, and all of a sudden they're dragging you out of your house in front of your family, and you're just hoping that they don't end up shooting you and your dog because you posted
mm,
something somewhat derogatory about a sitting congressman or whatever the case is. That is that is the most abhorrent abuse of power, and
mm,
they will use that to craft a narrative and weaponize your free speech against you, your First Amendment rights against you. That up to and including where did they attend church? What did they feel? Have they been to protests? And they will craft this narrative in utilizing your whole First Amendment against you. And I'm not saying that there's not consequences for the exercise of the First Amendment in many facets. There absolutely is. The exercise of rights is not without consequence. But what I will say is when we sit here and we have an earnest look, we have an honest conversation about where the government lands on the First Amendment as well as the other amendments. Let us not mistake ourselves that these individuals, they don't care. They don't
mm.
genuinely care about you. They don't care about your family. They care about what interests and what conversations are had that serves them, their agenda, and their narrative. That is the only time that they support free speech, whether it's about a certain congressman, whether it's about a certain country, whether it's about a certain terrorist organization. That is a terrorist organization, but they're today's freedom fighters for our government. You know, this
Mm.
is this is the growing issue, and perhaps I'm getting a little riled up about this, but I mean, come on, people, this is why we have to make a concerted effort to get out there, make our voices heard when so many people today, I hear it so often. Well, who am I? What is it that I offer? I'm just an average person. No, you are the one of the most powerful pieces of the puzzle, and that's how we were designed as a nation. And it is, you know, I'm not saying you have to do it, but it is so imperative in the preservation of liberty that you do it. And I
Mm.
promise you, if you look hard enough, if you seek hard enough and far enough, you will find other people that you can lock arms with and that you can find a common bond with that share your same ideals. Liberty is not one alone, and it is certainly not one without action. So that's all I will say.
I just say if you're gonna lock arms with people, be prepared. You know, you might have to tolerate. You might find the people they could be Midwesterners coming from like Minnesota or something. So just
Yeah,
brace yourself for that. Um, they could be
yeah,
Englishmen for all you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
I mean, so just I would just keep that in mind.
yeah, yeah. It's oh, man. I mean, it is.
Here's the thing. Everybody thinks that we're so different, but we're not that different. First of all, especially in all seriousness, as it pertains to like the UK, like most
Yeah,
of our ancestors came from there, okay?
yeah.
Including mine, okay? So it's like culture. I mean, nobody's having to translate for Gene right now, you know? It's like um
Good
we
job,
share
Gene. I'm
we're
just
we're
kidding.
we're we share a common culture, but moreover, like humanity isn't really all that different in point of
Yeah,
fact. And like we all kind of want the same things. I mean, there's variations. Look, and I'm not saying there aren't severe cultural
yeah,
differences, but at the end of the day, like, what do you want? You want to have a decent life. You want to have your family, probably, or friends. You want your time to be, we just want to spend our time at better things. And it's like, but this is that animating contest, right? This is the
yes,
game that we're thrown into, and we have to decide what we're going to do with it, because the minute you're born,
That's right.
people think that, oh, we're going to go to war now, or we're in peacetime. There's no such thing as peacetime. This is a battlefield. To live is to be engaged in a battle, and if it isn't overt, then it's covert, and if it's not obvious, the covert battle that you're in, there's a spiritual battle that you are in fundamentally the minute that you exit the womb. Well,
I had to put it up there.
just because you kicked.
Well said, Gene.
We
Well
had help
said.
from the French. I know you guys love them too, right?
Oh
Um,
boy. There you go. We're starting wars across the world now.
oh
Hey,
man.
by the way, would that be considered insightful speech? Is that insightful rhetoric if you
I
bring
think
up
it's
the French?
insightful. INSIGHTFUL.
Ah,
Yeah.
all right. Loophole, man. If they can do it, we can too. So
I'm a big fan of homonyms.
no,
Um,
it's good.
but yeah, you know, but the non-compliance thing is like, it really is like the spread of ideas. That's why it's so horrifying, because that can bring in the numbers game,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the only thing they understand is violence. I'll
Mm,
say that, but violence is not. They don't. Their understanding is not what's required to shift things.
yeah.
You know, um, but we have to want it. And the thing
Hmm.
of it is like, nobody rises to the level that they're capable of until they're forced to by a stimulus that is sufficiently aggressive.
Right.
And we're getting a dose of that right now.
Yeah.
And if this dose isn't enough, then we'll get a bigger dose.
Oh, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
And if that dose isn't enough, then we'll get a bigger dose. So the
Hmm.
pain stops just the minute we decide that it's sufficient enough to lose our faith.
Right.
I'm a big advocate of leaving the religion of government. Anytime you like, you're free to do
100%.
that.
Yeah, I always picture somewhere for people that worship government that they're surrounding some type of Lovecraftian,
Mm.
monolith,
Hmm.
and it's this all hail the almighty monolith that is government or something ridiculous like that. And that's what I get is kind of like an image, I guess, and it really is kind of wild. It's this government, which is one of the most undependable, insidious at times, corrupt, easily corruptible institutions, and it's like, you're putting a lot of trust in people that really just have no interest in at least today there's zero interest in actually helping you. I mean, there's a number of different examples of that, of course, but um, you know, I guess, because we're almost at an hour and a half, but when I think about, the First Amendment, free speech in particular, I think it's one of those things to where it's so important, and it's not just important to us on an individual basis, but for supporting liberty. It really, like I said it earlier, it is that first line of defense. It's the first line in terms of everything else cascading into an effect. Like, our voice is powerful, and that's the biggest issue, is they really do truly worry about, voices coming together. And um, in the grand scheme of things, I feel like some of the greatest movements historically in the world have always started with, like, you know, uh, a dissenting opinion and the ability
Mm.
to take that dissenting opinion. And I'm not talking about the ability of utilizing that dissenting opinion via permission of the government. I'm talking about that opinion being expressly put forth despite the government. And that comes into
Mm.
that noncompliance. And you know, it's so fundamental. It's so fundamental to everything else that comes with it, and which is why I do feel that they are trying to, or at least they really seemed to have a very large monopoly on the First Amendment. And when I say
Mm.
they, I mean, the greater governments of the world. Um, I think now there is some hope at the end of the tunnel. I'm not a hopeless person. I'm a hopeful person. I'm hopefully realistic. And when I look at where things are, and I look at people who are creating podcasts, and whether or not you get a bunch of people or whether you only get a handful of people, and you look at people who are starting their own gazettes, their own magazines, they're starting their own publications, they're bringing together and they're organizing with people into caucuses, and they're doing all of these different things. That really is like one of the greatest things that we have the ability to do. And I think you're seeing so much more of a resurgence of that. And I would say it's almost to the point of a renaissance where people are like, oh, this is what I actually didn't have all these years. And now they're realizing, wait, but I actually did have it all these years. I just didn't realize what I had. And that comes with education. And so it's one of those things that if it's not guarded, and I would argue when it comes to our rights, we have to guard them jealously. We have to be very jealous of our rights, and we have to be very defensive of our rights, and we have to ask questions whenever our rights come into question. You know, it really is like the strongest. It really becomes the strongest bulwark against tyranny, you know, and it emphasizes our efforts to do more and better as time goes on. So
check this out, right? So let's say you have the right to this YZ, and we have to XYZ, and we have to
yeah,
guard them jealously, XYZ. Well, let's say they hadn't written those down, right? What's the difference pragmatically from them having written it down and not written it down?
mm,
And what it is
yeah,
is that it stirs up in you this position. Hey, you can't do that. I have rights.
yeah,
Okay. So what's the difference between that and not having it down? It's your belief.
mm, mm-hmm,
It's fundamentally belief. It is
yeah,
faith. Okay. So that's why the ideas are so powerful. Hey, you can't do that. And then everybody is like, hey, you can't do that collectively. Hey, you
yes,
can't do that. Why? Because we have rights. Whether you do
mm-hmm,
or not, you do. But whether you do or not, if you believe it, that's enough.
yes, yeah, and you know, and I'll put kind of a twist like you did with the pragmatism on that, because I think there's also, in addition, another side to this as well. You know, when we think of natural God-given rights, these are rights that are essential to our existence. So when you look at certain things, like people say, I have a right to health care, right? Uh, it's like, so you have the right to the goods or services of another person, which if
Mm,
you really want to
mm,
unpack this, it's like, okay, so what you're saying is they are subject to what you want, when you want it, how you want it, whenever
right.
you want it. And that can't be, because a right that invalidates or imposes upon another right that, you know, that you say is a right, how can that then exist to be a right? You know, so it's like we have the right to self-preservation, which is codified within our Second Amendment. Did it clearly and explicitly say it's or states, aside from the obvious verbiage, that we have the right to keep and bear arms. That this right, regardless, is it shall not be infringed, and the word "shall" is very, very important, because words legally, even back then, still had meaning. Shall is an absolute stop. You cannot do this. It forbids government from doing this. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it is a violation, a clear violation that is punishable. And that's something that needs to be understood. So when you look at these things, you cannot deprive a person the natural right to self-preservation, right? That's also in saying, like, it, you can't deprive a person the right of being able to say the things that they want to say. Now, to be fair, again, like I've said before, you know, does that mean if I'm like, hey, you know, Stephen, you're such and such and such, and
Hey,
and that might make you upset? Well, if I get punched in the face because you don't like that, it doesn't make it right for you to do that, but that's a action reaction type of thing. I should have understood that, like, well, that's probably not the nicest thing for me to say, and I should have expected that he might have
well, I mean, that's we
gotten
have
upset.
civil law. We have civil law too, right? So it's like if you
Yes.
truly defame somebody, then you can sue them. So,
Right. And so, like, there are consequences. There are certain things that we have. but it's like, it's like going back to the I have the right to health care. I have the right to
Mm,
have a home. No, these things are services provided by other people
yeah.
via their property rights, because it's their property in which they're extending to you. It's their time, their services, their products that you don't have a right to. Because if you go in and you start assuming that you have a right to that, that's what? That's theft. You can't just
Yeah.
take stuff from people. So, and
Right.
and that may not be the most eloquent way of explaining it. And I know that there's some people, uh, including up to that I know, that could probably explain that far more eloquent than me. But the point is like, yes, we have rights, but these rights are also perceived as rights that are essential to our existence. And so when you look at healthcare, it's like, well, do you say that? Do you still argue that you have the right to health care if you're in the middle of the Amazon and there's not a hospital for 1,000 miles? Like at that point, it doesn't really matter, like, and
Yeah.
that might not be the best argument to make, but the point is like, what are you going to do? Will a hospital to show up? Like, it doesn't work that way, but you have the right to self, preservation. So you could be actively taking steps to try and push forward your self-preservation instead of sitting there wallowing in things that you don't have the right to anyway. So
Mm,
it's, I think, I guess to wrap up, because I don't want to get too far afield in this, but I do think that when you look at the general conversations that were had, especially in the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, which I think they're fascinating. People should definitely, you don't have to read the whole thing. Take some time and read them, because the arguments that were had back then are arguments that we're having today, and I think they're timeless arguments. Um, but it really does paint a picture of kind of a sense of maturity, if you will. There's an intellectual maturity that existed, and we don't have that sense of intellectual maturity, not contemporarily in that way anymore. So, um, oh, a drowning man cannot argue with the ocean about his right to life. No, 100%. Yeah, just like, oh, I have the right to life. Better start swimming, dude. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Like I said, there's people that could make that argument far better than me, and I don't know that it necessarily came out the way that I would have liked it to, but hopefully people understood the point that I was trying to convey. But we're we're getting at about an hour and a half. I say let's see here. So we'll kind of finish off on this. We'll try and end on a very positive note, because I think positivity is something that's kind of in short supply these days. Where do we go from here? Is there hope? How do we affect change? And ultimately, the mantra of rights not exercised are rights not kept, something I deeply believe in. And I think the appropriate way to go from here, and I think the hope lies in community. We have to build
mm,
communities. We have to work within our communities. We have to be able to provide a foundation in which we can even more powerfully assert and exercise our rights, a springboard, so to speak. And I think of a well-grounded community of individuals, which eventually spreads into the rest of our states, and then eventually to the entirety of our states, is one of the most powerful things that we have at our disposal. And I've talked about this with you, and I've talked about this over on Centerline Systems and some of the other podcasts that I've been a part of. And we all agree that community is fundamental to the preservation of liberty. It's fundamental to preserving the way of life that we want. But what it does is it also creates a bulwark and a wonderful defense that we can preserve these things, because preservation is not enough. You can want to preserve something, but if you're not taking active steps to fundamentally defend them, it's kind of hard to preserve them. So that's kind of where I feel, especially as it pertains to the First Amendment. We have to make a concerted effort and really working towards the preservation and the defense of the First Amendment, first and foremost, in our communities. If we can't even have an open forum at our own town hall or our city councils, if we can't even speak freely or be able to engage in public, uh, or addressing our grievances, public discourse, assembly, freedom of the press, and all of the things that are involved in that. If we can't do that at a fundamental community level, there's no way that it's going to be able to take effect in the proper way, in the sustainable, in the long-term way that it needs to at a federal level. So, with that being said, I'll leave the floor to you, Blackbeard, because I think I, as well as many other people, would love to hear what you have to say on that.
Community is a great point. And the more that I've thought about this, the more that I feel like it's the only viable solution
Mm,
for continued existence going forward of
yeah,
people that aren't, well, maybe at all, okay? And so I'm gonna joke a little bit here, but I'm half serious. Like we should create a commune. Like I and I'm not saying I'm gonna burn sage and adopt a vegan lifestyle, but I'm not saying I'm not, okay? Not saying I'm not. Uh, but but look, like, I mean, if you look at this, every aspect of how we're living is completely insane. It's
yeah,
completely insane. And it's completely divorced from the way that we used to live. Like, even just going back to medieval Europe, as a see, the vehicle and perverse incentives destroyed this for Americans, but things used to be walkable. Like, for example, one of my friends is a European. Not Gene, not that we're not friends, Gene, but we're not. I don't really know you,
hi,
but I still
Gene.
like you, okay? I still appreciate you, okay?
Yeah,
But no, I went over and I visited him, and I was amazed that I could walk to anything
yeah,
that I wanted, and you can't do that here. Um, and that's because of we're a newer country and everything was built around the automobile. They got rid of public transit.
yeah,
Everything here is built on the automobile. Well, for various reasons, like we are atomized, divided, separated,
mm,
isolated, and
yep,
what makes people happy, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the top pillars is
yes,
community. And we need to be living in way closer community with walkable human spaces, with designs that make people that inspire the human spirit.
sure,
That's why I'm a big proponent of like churches that are extremely ornate and audacious. I love
mm,
it. I think we
yeah,
should have more of it because it
yeah,
is beautiful and it speaks to on a lot of different levels. Okay, so
absolutely,
but we should do that with all things, like, and we should have close community, not huge, but we should have many of
mm,
them,
yeah,
and they should we should all have skin in the game in one another's lives, and we should care about each other, and when we fall in hard times we lift each other. When one
yeah,
person is doing well, he lifts the rest. When he's doing poorly, the rest lifts him. So we don't go begging to people who hate us for the resources that we need. When we're in
100%,
trouble,
yeah,
we come to each other and we understand that obligation one to another, and we embrace that obligation,
yes,
and we live in closer connection to nature and the land. We just we need to completely change the way that we're living,
yeah,
and everything is so convenient still, and I'm talking about myself in this, that we're just not willing to do it yet. But as the pain intensifies, we're going to take it more seriously. And I just hope that it's not too late. But it needs to happen. We need to educate ourselves. Like I have friends that, a lot of my close friends, their children will, and these are not rich people, okay? But their kids are not going to public school. They're not
right,
going to public school.
yeah,
And it's little things like that. And they all talk to me about wanting the kind of life that I've just mentioned. I guarantee you it's resonating with some of the people here, okay? And we need to do this. We need to do this because it'll get rid of depression in people. It'll add
mm,
meaning to people's lives. We're so far separated from nature, and I think that that's something that everybody in the whole Liberty Centerline circuit here kind of resonates with, is the
yeah,
idea of the importance of the natural world.
absolutely,
Um, nature and nature's God, as our forebears might have, said.
yeah,
So community, I'll tell you what, man, we need it. It's a huge part of the solution to this. We're trying, part of the problem is that we're trying to live at a scale that isn't a human scale.
right, yeah,
And so you fix that. And that's something too that the whole idea of the republic and the country as it was initially conceived. It's like, what is liberty? Liberty isn't just like the government leaving alone, you leaving you alone.
Yeah,
Liberty is also, it's like you being sufficient in and unto yourself. Okay,
sure.
so like what, and that is part of that is like in an agrarian sense, but it also is the sense of like responsibility, the
Hmm.
responsibility that is that comes along. It's like a co laborer with the liberty is the responsibility
Sure.
proportionally. And so we need to embrace all of those things and look, and just the danger and the problem has always been is that, and they understood, they understood that living in a smaller way and in a more agrarian way without empire building
Yeah,
necessitates a reduction in wealth and convenience.
sure.
And I think that was understood. The problem with that is that when you live in that way, those who choose empire and reliance on the system for a time, especially with the manipulation of currency for a
Yeah,
time, they develop a level of power, um, technologically speaking, that is difficult to coexist with. So the Amish have been doing it, okay? And I'm not saying become Amish, but I'm just saying they've been doing it because they're viewed as non-threatening. But if they were viewed as threatening, if there was a conflict between them and the forces of modernity, they're going to lose very quickly. So that's always been the problem with it. But I think what you're going to see is that this communal kind of living and the renaissance of the understanding of living at a human scale, building at a human scale, and living in a communal existence with where everyone has a skin in the game. In other words, returning to the past in the
yeah,
way that we used to live for the majority of human existence,
sure.
at least in some measure, that it's going to gain in momentum. I
Hmm.
think it's early right now, but it's going to gain in momentum. And
Yeah.
hey, yeah, yeah, you can call me Yoder, and I'll dress from the 19th century if that's what it takes. But I
I
like
mean,
my mustache, so I don't think the Amish thing is going to work for me. And I think we should just do our own thing.
yeah. Well, you bring up the Amish communities, and the first thought that I had, and this is my horrible attempt at making a joke, but all of a sudden, now that you've brought this up, I can already see a bunch of van lifers now selling their vans and converting immediately to the Amish community because that's going to be the next big fad. Uh, and look, okay, this is going to be my one insensitive point. Um, Maybe they'll bathe more often. I don't.
Oh no!
I'm sorry. Um, Look, I said what I said. All right. No, it's not
All the
everybody.
Amish people watching this stream are so upset right now, which is a total of zero because they're averse to technology.
They don't even know what's coming. We have just all of a sudden they're going to get 20 something van lifers that just don't have their life together. And holy balls. No, I had to pick it because to me it was an easy mark, but I digress. It, you know, it, like you said, community can't be understated. It really can't. It's the core and the foundation of everything we have. And when you look at, great changes in history, it's never by the majority. It's always by a minority of the most willing people. And, in the end of the day, we're kind of in a very interesting situation to where we have numbers in this country, but the realm of liberty is appealing to very few people, and I don't
Mm.
want to say necessarily in the purest form, but in a fairly pure form to where most people can be agreeable. There's not few of us, but there's a few of us that are willing to go that next extra step to try and get that outcome. And then by way, you'll have some extras come along. And what that does, though, is it allows us to really augment our First Amendment and really get out there because to a certain degree, I mean, you have people that feel like that they have a lot more leeway in working room because they're not beholden to the Democrats, the Republicans, the left, the right. They're just like, okay, well, this is my opinion, this is my point of view, this is liberty, and if you want to come with me, then hey, come on, tag along and let's do this great thing, and let's restore our country to, as some call it, the great experiment, because I mean, let's be honest, like, we're not experimenting anymore. The experiment was trying to expand the realm of liberty. And I don't even know if I like calling it an experiment, because I think it's so much more than that. But it all starts with community. And like I said, if you can't even foster it at a community level, even something as much as going to a parent-teacher meeting and allowing your voice to be heard, if that's not happening, then you got a lot more work to do. And if it's not happening at that point, then you can't start bigger than your community.
The great experiment,
Yeah.
Jeremy, as you stated,
Yeah.
experiment, scientific method, question or hypothesis,
Yep.
test,
Mm-hmm.
observation, conclusion. Okay.
Yeah.
Hypothesis, testing, observation, conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
What is the hypothesis or the question of the great experiment, which was the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Can man rule himself?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And that's I'm really happy you brought that up, because I mean, that really is what it is, right? It's
That's what it
the
is.
notion of self-governance. It's the notion of being independent, of being sovereign, of being a person with that exercises their inalienable rights, their self-professed, their pre-existing natural God-given rights. And I think it's been shown that it is possible, but it's also shown that because it's possible, because it is such a unique thing, it's also easily derailed, because what is required is many things that you and I had talked about tonight, which is a big one being education. A big one is, getting people away from, good foundational, practical, principled approaches to life, whether you're a Christian or whatever the case is, and subverting that to the worship of government, taking that and putting all of your eggs in one basket, redefining certain things, like all it like that. And I think that's the thing that so many people, I think, don't realize today is there's always going to be the potential of corruption. It's like there's this idea that when we were founded, like, oh, like, we're not we are so resistant to corruption. I would argue that some of the most principled things, like the founding of our country, was at the highest risk of corruption, because even back then there were people willing to depose it because it did not fulfill their needs, their wants, their narrative, their wishes, etc. So whenever you have something that's truly unique, that truly is going to put forth or amplify a very principled and liberty oriented approach, it's always going to have a very large amount of resistance. And if you're not judicious, if you're not aware, if you're not, possible or always on the lookout for something to come in and undermine it and corrupt it, then of course, yes, it's
eternal vigilance.
Absolutely. And it's, and it was really implied that we have a responsibility in maintaining our republic. That doesn't, so many people want to cast off this, they want to cast off this responsibility to the person that they elected or the person that they voted for. It's not enough. It's not enough. That's why, it's been implied and it's been impressed in so many founding documents, not just the ones that we have, but the ones leading up to it, that the impetus is on us. It always has been, and it always will be. We must secure our liberty. We cannot cast this responsibility out entirely to somebody else. And it, it's been said so many times over the course of history. It's been, and our founders knew this especially, the primary function of a proper government, derived on the consent of the people, and consent is a very important word, is is the support and the defense of the individual's rights and liberties. That is the primary and most important object of any good government. When it becomes destructive of those means, it no longer is a just nor good government and deserves to be reconstructed. And that was something that was very, very much implied and talked about. And today we have all but forgotten that. And I think, that doesn't mean that you erase everything. It doesn't mean you get rid of everything in terms of certain documents or whatever. But what it means is, like, if you're going to have a clean slate, if you're really going to try and fix something, you have to get rid of all the people in all of the positions, and you have to be willing to start over. And that's a big ask. It's a very big ask.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's astonishing that with how this country came to be, the United States, that we have not had more revolutions or more civil wars than we have, because there were definitely some noteworthy in very fever pitch moments where it very well could have happened. And I'm not saying it necessarily had to be violent either, but a rebellion of noncompliance, a rebellion of individuals that refuse to just go with the status quo. And quite frankly, I think the Federal Reserve should have been one of those moments. But again, look at how they did it. So, is there hope? Yes. I will always believe that there is hope. I will always believe that there is a brighter picture, but you have to get through the train tunnel first, and you have to get a ways into the train tunnel before you see the light on the other side. There is hope, but like I said, and like Blackbeard has said, we got to start with the community, and we have to be willing to help and support each other. So, and with that, I think we can do a lot.
I can't add to that. I think that's succinct, complete, nearly exhaustive. I mean, it's just well said.
Thank you. Yeah, I I think it's just what I feel based off of what I know. And, and when you combine what and there's always room to grow, right? But when you take what you compare it with what exists, and you look at what it is, what it was, and what it can be, I think it makes a difference. And perspective is so important. So, we're almost at the 2-hour mark here. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to bring out, or anything in particular you want to chat about here quick?
Recognizing your rights is right. And if you don't protect your right, all you'll have is what's left.
Yeah. I like that, dude. That's so good. That's so good. I really have nothing else. I feel like if I continue on further, I'm only going to muddle what we've said, and I think we've ended and we've wrapped up on a pretty good point. So I would hate to diminish that. First and foremost, Blackbeard, thank you very much for taking time out of your day. And it's, I have to say, it's pretty incredible how you've been diligently working, and also, providing very good thoughts and in perspective. I probably would have screwed up the project about 100 times at this point.
Two different parts of the brain.
And I was about to say, there may have been a moment to where you did, and you just didn't. Just absolute stone
I've
face.
made a mistake, but you know what? I'm not going to tell a living soul. You're going to have to look for it, okay?
Look, I'm here to tell you, stone-faced killer right over here. Just no reaction, and he's just talking about the principles and the philosophical things. Couldn't even tell that he screwed something up, and he just kept on going. So that's why I love you, dude. But really, thank you so much for coming on. Means
Thank
a
you
lot.
for having me.
Yeah, and I hope down the road, we're able to have you back on. I think you bring a unique perspective and a lot of really good thoughts to any discussion that you're a part of. And if I may say, there are times to where I feel like perhaps you don't give yourself enough credit. You're a pretty smart dude, and I think your insight is worth having on any podcast. So, in just the time that I've gotten to know you, especially through Centerline Systems and in all of our times working together. So, it's been a pleasure, man. And I feel like this was a good one to start you on. It was a good conversation overall. So, with that being said, I really appreciate everybody who took the time out of their evenings, their days. I know there's people that come from different parts of the world. Thank you very much for coming by, listening to the conversation. And I just want to say, look, if you have anything that you want to bring up or any comments or questions or anything like that, I will do the best that I can to address those in the comment section post the live here. And, and hopefully we can continue a meaningful discussion even well after this live and this video is done. So thank you for, coming and joining us this evening at Sentinels of Liberty. And I wish you the best. God bless. Good night. And we'll see you down the road.